Hello, listeners. Just checking in with you again between seasons. We're still hard at work on season 3. So until then, here's another story told within the world of Hidden Oaks. The Basement Window by Patrick W. Marsh. Gert didn't think she had it in her when she started the job. Now she was one morning, afternoon, and early evening away from being done. By supper time, she would be sipping tea and eating a tuna sandwich, and the physical savagery left behind from the storm would be relegated to a tidy woodpile behind her house. Gert had spent the better part of the last 3 days slowly cutting and moving chunks of the toppled oak tree off her driveway. It had been holding her hostage since that tempest had abruptly and randomly thrashed her home. Gert rested after moving each individual segment of the fibrous beam. She would sit down on a pink long chair with cobwebs in its springs and smile proudly. In her 70-year-old memory, she could not pinpoint a single activity that had been this laborious or strenuous. No other household job even crept close to it, except maybe the Halloween blizzard of 1991, where she, along with her husband Ernest, had to shovel out the 20-plus inches of snow. She could never forget that day. It was like the entire world had been bleached into a glistening void of colorless white. Gert was pudgy, short, and bent like a candy cane. She was white with curly hair that would be gray, but she had it dyed a deep chestnut every few weeks at a local salon. She lived just blocks away from Silver Lake Road and a mile from Hidden Oaks Park. Today was one of the early fall mornings where the leaves hadn't yet started to flare into various shades of red, orange, and yellow. The air had that subtle, cool itch to it, which made summer already seem far away. She was thankful for the lower temperature as she worked on the tree. Gert didn't have extra money to hire a tree trimming service. Her neighbor, an older man named Ron who always wore ruby red suspenders that matched a baseball cap, cut her grass out of kindness with his riding mower. When the tree fell, she automatically asked him for help, but he couldn't assist her. He'd had a bad fainting episode before the storm. He said he saw something crawling on the ceiling while he was reading his newspaper. The terror and surprise caused him to pass out. His doctor said to take it easy, just out of precaution. Normally, Gert would ignore his ramblings. For years, Ron had talked about something living in his house with him. However, during the storm, she'd experienced her own share of weirdness, which made his tall tales harder to dismiss. Days after this seemingly landlocked hurricane, Gert found an orange chainsaw with a black handle sitting on her front doormat, with a pair of work gloves and clear protective goggles. Ron had dropped them off with a note saying the chainsaw was full of gas and he'd fill it up for her whenever she needed it. He wrote in bits of shaky cursive, "If I can do it, you can do it." Gert had about 5 pieces of oblong bark left to wheel to her backyard. She had been cutting them into manageable pieces with the chainsaw. It took a few tries to get it to cut cleanly and evenly, and to pace the buzzing blades sinking into the wood. She was surprised by how easy it was to cut and how she could balance the weight of the machine and her body to part the lumber. Gert enjoyed the experience. The air smelled like a hardware store. The motor thrummed like a mechanical bird. She could easily track her progress, and that gave her a feeling of accomplishment before she even completed the job. Gert used a blue wheelbarrow to move the slices to the backyard. It squeaked and ached with each rotation of the wheel. The inside of it was chipped and rusted by years of rain. Ernest had bought it when they were first married and never replaced it. Gert wondered if he could see her doing this monumental job wherever he was now. He had passed away 3 years ago from prostate cancer. With each trip to her backyard, Gert had avoided looking at the basement window. She'd followed the black driveway and green grass, keeping her eyes low to avoid even a casual glance of the bottom edge of her navy blue Rambler. Gert thought if she didn't make visual contact with the slit of glass sitting amongst the grass and rocks, she wouldn't have to relive or remember what had happened inside her home during the storm. It was wishful thinking. Every night she dreamed about it. Every morning she woke up to it. Every day she was reminded about that household abyss tied to the thunderclouds which effortlessly caged her like a frightened mouse. When the storm hit, it was like some malicious god somewhere had nonchalantly flipped the dial of reality from mundanely peaceful to horrifyingly violent. Trees buckled instantly. A sustained roar gripped the foundation of her home. Purple and reddish flashes burst and fractured around the simmering green dome of the sky. The beams lingered in emerald sparks with each atmospheric drubbing. The lightning reminded Gert of a potted plant she dropped at Menards years ago. Its round clay frame didn't shatter on the store's floor like she had anticipated, but cracked in every direction. Gert immediately turned on the television to look at the radar, but there was no signal on any channel. She dug through her kitchen's junk drawer for the battery-powered radio her husband kept for emergencies, but couldn't find it anywhere. As she was flinging pen caps and half-dead batteries around, her skin seemed to stand still. She felt light, nauseated, and short of breath. The purple bathrobe wrapped around her seemed heavy. It felt like someone was watching her. The sensation sat on her shoulders as if she was frozen to the counter she was leaning over. Then something shattered outside in her front yard, and the spell broke. She dashed towards the basement door in the center of her house. Strangely, when Gert arrived at the door, it already sat dangling ajar. It reminded her of a bird's broken wing. She didn't know why. There was too much violence outside for her to focus on the anomaly for long. An orchestra of smashes, cracks, and whirls was all around her. She quickly trudged down the wooden stairs, minding each slippered foot the best she could in her panicked state. Gert got 3 steps down when the power faded out and whistled in a bang. She lamented not grabbing a flashlight. The basement smelled of mildew and dust. It was thick enough for her to taste it. The roar was still above her, but it was dampened slightly, which gave her a little confidence that she'd survive the storm. She continued downwards, with the steps passing beneath her in even thunks. "I should be down there already, shouldn't I?" she said, curling her lip. The space around her was black. Her eyes couldn't find any details that would normally be in her basement. Canning jars, shelves, boxes, the washer and dryer. It was all hidden by the all-encompassing gloom. Gert looked back up the stairs and started to panic, grabbing the round railing with her hand. She felt like she was swimming deep underwater on her back and was looking up at the sun through the surface, but it wasn't a cool, flattened blue with a muted, bright orb looking back at her like in a lake or an ocean. Instead, it was a pure and fluid darkness that would rival the deepest pits on the earth. The song of the storm was quieter, but still there in a vacuous and unchanging scream. Gert scrambled back upstairs. She was physically unable to continue going down. Fear would not allow it. However, as she climbed, the square of daylight from the open door stayed fixed away from her, no matter how many steps she ascended. What is happening?" she said, starting to run. Nothing changed ahead of or behind her. She stayed fixed in the dimness, the stairs stretching into the atmosphere. She hyperventilated. She cried. Her heart beat hard enough, it felt like it was going to spring out through her spine. Eventually, her legs grew wobbly and she sat down, tucking her face into her hands in frustrated tears. She wept uncontrollably until snot and salty tears reached her chin. Eventually, she quieted, and she looked around. The locomotive rattle was gone. The silhouette of things in the basement began to look normal and somewhat serene. She stood up quickly, nearly fainted, and crawled up the steps. She slammed the door behind her and put a chair against it, propping its handle shut. It was still that way today. Despite being terrified of living in her own house, Gert was happy to be right about how long her current task would take her. She was finished with the last of the logs before the evening. Beneath the broken tree was a flotsam of leaves, bark, and other bits of green pulp. She started to sweep them into a pile, which she would load into the wheelbarrow tomorrow morning. Under some of the bits of twigs and dirt was a crumpled piece of paper. Gert unrolled it shakily. Storm support. Come talk and share stories with others at St. Kateri's Catholic Church. Meeting on Wednesdays at 7 o'clock p.m. Contact Father Witherow at 651-636-7486. Thank you. Hope to see you there. The Hidden Oaks podcast is a collaboration between Patrick W. Marsh, Robert Don, and Owen Swerkstrom. The story, The Basement Window, written by Patrick W. Marsh. The voice of Hidden Oaks, performed by Robert Don. Original music composed and performed by David Schwartz. Find more of his works at dtschwartz.com. Produced by Robert Don, Owen Swerkstrom, and Patrick W. Marsh. You can find out more online by visiting us at hiddenoakspodcast.com or by finding us on Twitter at Hidden Oaks Pod, as well as Facebook and Instagram at Hidden Oaks Podcast. Hidden Oaks is an Ironfield independent production. Thank you for listening, and until next time.